shouldn't have pardoned him. It's really, really hard to say. It's just hard. I do know this. If the election had been held a week later, Carter would have lost because he was slipping in the polls all along, and Ford was gaining everywhere. And I am quite certain that Ohio and Hawaii would have shifted if the election had been a week later. And I think you and I have talked about this, Lewis, that it sets up one of those great historical what ifs. What if Ford had won in 1976 and Carter lost? I still think the same issues are present 4 years later. And I think that Carter winds up being the nominee of the Democratic Party. And then he is probably running against Reagan because Ford can't run anymore because he's already served more than half of Nixon's term, which is another one of those constitutional provisions that came in as a result of FDR. You can only serve 2 terms, and you can only serve, if you serve part of another president's term, if it's more than half of that term, you can only serve that. So Ford was limited to a year, to a term and a half. So anyway, the point being, I think that everything would have completely changed if that election had gone differently in 76, because I think we would have had Carter and Reagan in 1980, and I think the result would have been different. But the Electoral College in that year might have been pretty peculiar, because you would have seen, I think, a very strange mix of what you think ought to be Democratic states voting Republican and vice versa. So yeah, I think that's probably in all time the greatest presidential historical what if. All right, so let's bounce forward to 84, and you see total wipeout by Reagan, and this was the last landslide that we saw. Because then we start seeing a pattern creep in. We're seeing some of these northern states turn blue. But what's happening? They're losing electoral college votes. They're losing them, and they're going in these other places. So if you remember back to 2000 and how close it was, and after the census that year, if the election had taken place with the new census, Bush would have won with an even larger electoral vote majority than he did, all because of the shift. So some of these states, like New Mexico, maybe Arizona, some of them are turning blue compared to what they used to be. But at the same time, a lot of these states that have been traditionally blue, they're losing their votes. So they don't have as much power as they used to. All right, so let's talk about something else that has a big impact on the Electoral College. All right, so this is 92. Look what happened here. You've got an independent candidate, 19% of the vote. But what do you notice about the map? Anybody? He didn't win a single state. He didn't win nothing. And he had a 19% vote total pretty much across the board. And he drew pretty evenly from both of the traditional party candidates. But he didn't win a single state. He didn't even win any congressional districts, like up here in Maine or up here in Nebraska, where they vote that way. So what happens? What does that tell you about our politics? There's 2 things. One, we're in a 2-party system, which is unlike any other country in the world. See, you see Europe, you see Central America, you see all these other places, they have multiple parties, and it's kind of a free-for-all. And we just don't have that. What has happened over time is that whatever issues the third parties have, they get consumed by the 2 major parties. And part of the reason is the Electoral College, because they just can't generate enough votes to win anything. So with that said, let's go back Let's go back